May 6, 1937. I remember it clearly. The Hindenburg exploded in a massive fireball, becoming the most iconic air crash in history. Its cause remains a mystery. I recall overhearing someone bark an order, "Hey, order Batman, I'd take it another 30 degrees." And then everything changed. Now, decades later, a team of scientists is attempting something never done before. They plan to build replicas of the Hindenburg and test every theory surrounding the disaster, including groundbreaking testimony from a young eyewitness who was speaking for the first time in 75 years. That eyewitness described seeing a little bit of blue fire just forward of the vertical rudder. These scientists want to look at each piece of the puzzle that might have led to this catastrophe and then see what happens when everything comes together. After all these years, they hope to finally answer one question: what really destroyed the Hindenburg? I used to imagine how it felt to be there, greeting everyone from the Naval Air Base at Lakehurst, New Jersey, where the great airship was scheduled to land, her first transatlantic crossing of the 1937 season. The flight from Germany took 3 days, 12 hours longer than expected because of bad weather. On board were 97 passengers and crew. When I think back on it, I can still picture it approaching, so large, filled with 200,000 cubic meters of hydrogen gas. Someone exclaimed, "What a marvelous sight!" They dropped ropes out of the nose of the ship, and a crew on the ground took hold. That day marked the Hindenburg's 11th U.S. landing, and although it was already famous as the largest airship in the world, it remained front-page news. I can hear the voice in my head. Back motors to the ship, holding it just enough to keep it from a sternward flight. "Get this, Charlie. Get this, Charlie. It's starting to rise. Oh my, get out of the way, please." Then came the horror. It's burning, breaking into flames, and falling. We were watching one of the worst catastrophes in aviation history. Flames rose, and in mere seconds, 35 passengers and crew were lost in the inferno. It took only 34 seconds and created a 75-year mystery. Plenty of theories surfaced: sabotage, an explosion, someone shooting from the ground, a spark from an engine backfire, or something to do with the weather like a static spark from atmospheric electricity. Investigations began in both the U.S. and Germany. Both concluded that a spark ignited leaking hydrogen, but they couldn't agree on where the leak came from or how the spark formed. Many believed it had to be sabotage, and other theories emerged over time. But as someone who has followed every lead, I know how important it is to examine them all with fresh eyes. Leading this new investigation is aeronautical engineer G.M. Stansfield. His team of scientists and engineers will construct a series of 10th-scale Hindenburg models, each tested against a different theory. Which theories are worth testing? That will be decided in the lab. To be scientific, they can't become attached to any one idea. There can be no emotional bias. Explosives expert Steve Wolf is in charge of building the model airships. He reminds us that they're examining all plausible scenarios and will bring the most likely ones to life on their scale replicas. Assisting the scientists is airship historian Dan Grossman, who's blown away by the engineering feats of the 1930s. He always says he can picture those original photographs of the Hindenburg under construction in Germany and imagine being in that vast ship as it was built. By recreating each catastrophic scenario and comparing it with the original, they hope to solve this final great air crash mystery. In modern aviation, an airplane wouldn't be allowed to fly if nobody knew why the last one crashed, yet the Hindenburg disaster essentially ended an entire mode of transportation. Incredible German achievements in transatlantic airships went to the grave with this single event. Before the Hindenburg, the first Zeppelin flew over Germany in 1900. Prior to World War I, tens of thousands of people soared above the earth in gentle comfort. By 1919, air service was connecting southern Germany with Berlin in a fraction of the time it took by rail. By the 1930s, Zeppelins were transporting passengers all over Europe and beyond without serious competition. Only the Germans seemed able to master hydrogen, the lightest but most flammable lifting gas. Between 1918 and 1937, 5 British, French, and American airships were destroyed by fire, so everyone else gave up on hydrogen. The Germans, however, had flown thousands of hours with hydrogen and never lost a passenger. So they grew confident in their ability to handle this dangerous gas, confident enough to build the ultimate hydrogen airship, the Hindenburg. It took 5 years and £2.5 million, about $25 million at the time, to construct. At 250 meters long, it was nearly the size of the Titanic and became the largest man-made object ever to fly. It was lifted by 16 cotton gas cells filled with hydrogen. The flight deck was housed in an external gondola, while the living quarters were inside the hull, spanning 2 decks. Passengers enjoyed sleeping berths around the center of the main deck and spacious lounges on either side, offering spectacular views. It was the fastest, most luxurious passenger aircraft of its day, like the Concorde of the 1930s. Tickets cost as much as a car, attracting wealthy passengers, including Lady Grace Drummond Hay, the first woman to fly around the world. "I enjoyed the trip tremendously," she'd said. "It was a revelation." Still, there were compromises. Smoking was confined to a single pressurized lounge. Most luggage was shipped separately to save weight. Even the lounge piano was made from aluminum. But the biggest compromise was political. The Nazi government financed the Zeppelin Company, so Hindenburg began as a propaganda tool. Its first official flight in March 1936 was to encourage people to vote yes on Hitler's referendum. Whenever Germany held massive events like May Day or the 1936 Berlin Olympics, there was the Hindenburg broadcasting marching music from the sky, proudly emblazoned with Nazi swastikas. By May 1937, when the Hindenburg arrived in New Jersey, it was a familiar sight, flaunting German technology and Nazi might. The next morning, as dawn broke, investigators surveyed the wreckage. Many suspected sabotage. After all, the Nazis were despised around the world. Anyone wanting to strike at the Nazi regime could hardly find a more potent target than its flying billboard. Rumors abounded of bombs and malicious acts. One prime suspect was a German-American acrobat named Joseph Spey, who had easy access to the tail section to feed his dog, plus the athletic skills to climb the rigging. But despite an FBI investigation, there was no evidence. Family man Spey had no motive. Others believed the Hindenburg simply leaked hydrogen before it caught fire. The flight records suggested the rear of the ship was dropping for several minutes before landing. The crew released hydrogen from the nose, then water ballast from the tail. They also sent 6 men forward to weigh down the nose. Nothing helped. The control car crew must have suspected a hydrogen leak. Nobody ever discovered its origin. Maybe a snapped bracing wire or a stuck gas valve. If hydrogen was escaping for 8 minutes, mixing with air in the ventilation shafts, then the only missing ingredient was a spark. A thunderstorm hovered overhead, the largest natural spark generator on Earth. In 1937, the German inquiry concluded that a static spark ignited the leaking hydrogen, but didn't agree on how the hydrogen had escaped. Now, the new investigation set up a test. They reconstructed a section of the Hindenburg skin and aluminum frame, simulating the storm conditions by drenching it in water, then grounding the metal frame while charging the skin. Sure enough, a spark leapt between them, supporting the theory that static electricity set off the blaze. But in a test with a 10th scale model, igniting the hydrogen at the top never produced the explosion that eyewitnesses described. They got a big flame but lacked the massive fireball of the real crash. Another theory, proposed by a former NASA scientist, suggested that the Hindenburg's paint was thermite-like and burned like rocket fuel. But when scientists tested it by lighting pieces of the painted cotton skin, the results were unremarkable. The paint didn't behave like incendiary rocket fuel at all. Running out of options, the team turned to new evidence. A man named Mark Heald, only 8 years old at the time, had been far away from the main crowd. He and his father saw blue fire flicker near the top of the tail just before the flames erupted. This phenomenon, known as St. Elmo's fire, is a coronal discharge that can appear on tall objects in stormy conditions. But how would a flame on the outside ignite hydrogen inside? The answer lay in the ventilation shaft, open at both the top and bottom. If hydrogen was leaking there, any external flame could leap back into the ship, race along the shaft, and blow out the gas cells from inside. This perfectly matches the sequence reported by surviving crewman Helmut Lau, who heard a muffled detonation and saw fire erupt in the gas cell area. To test this, the team built their final Hindenburg model, ensuring hydrogen could vent internally. They ignited the top near the fin, simulating a coronal discharge. The results were spectacular, an explosive start in the center of the ship. It spread forward, but much of the frame remained intact until the model hit the ground, closely mirroring the original disaster footage. Ultimately, they concluded the Hindenburg became overcharged in the storm, leaked hydrogen at the tail, and then a spark, likely triggered by something akin to St. Elmo's fire, ignited an explosive hydrogen air mix in the ventilation shaft. That short-lived detonation set off the massive inferno, all in a matter of seconds. Even today, few catastrophes have had such a profound impact, effectively ending the age of the passenger airship. At least now it seems we have a clear reason why. And I'm left thinking, if only they could have found that leak, if only that spark never occurred, would giant airships still roam our skies today? We'll never know. But 75 years after that tragedy, I believe this final investigation has brought us as close to the truth as we will ever get.